for October. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Representative Bridges? Representative Fraser Gordon?
Yes.
Representative Herron?
Here.
Senator Rocky Adams? Senator Thayer?
Here.
Co-Chair West?
Here.
Senator Yates? And Chairman Lewis.
Here. With the quorum present, the subcommittee is duly constituted to do business. The first matter of business is approval of the minutes. Is there a second? Without objection, so ordered. Now, guys, we're kind of pressed for time today, so we're gonna move along the line. We're gonna do the behavioral health regulations first. That's, you want to call it a department.
Or Cabinet for Health and Family Services, Department for Medicaid Services, 907 KAR 1044 and 907 KAR 15005, both with agency.
Would you please identify yourself for the record?
Good afternoon, Jonathan Scott, Chief Legislative and Regulatory Officer, DMS. And if I could, at the beginning, we understand there are some additional concerns with these regs, and we would be happy to defer to discuss.
I appreciate that. We've been going back and forth on these for a little while, and appreciate all you all do and the conversations that have taken place. We do have somebody that wants to speak in opposition if they want to come up. Sorry, one second. They are in opposition. Please introduce yourself, and the mic is yours.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Mark Wilson. I'm a partner at Top Shelf Lobby, and I'm happy to be advocating today at the table for our client, Mountain Comprehensive Care in East Kentucky. Mountain Comp employs more than 1,600 employees. Our internal estimates will show that this regulation, if implemented, could cause a 25% contraction of their workforce to leave. With the increase in the cost of living the way it is in America right now, these workers may not have the resources to pay for increased groceries, much less the cost of more college coursework. And this will result in less care, especially in the mental health space that many constituents in the market area have come to expect. So we believe that this reg as written currently will be a deficiency in workforce as well as access to health care, especially in our rural parts and those who need mental health care services the most. So we would ask that this committee consider finding this reg deficient. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Mr. Scott, do you have any, would you like to offer a rebuttal?
Certainly. So we are, as part of these regulations, and again, we are happy to defer and to further discuss this over a period of time. However, behavioral health associates have, until this time, not had a...
I'm sorry. Please continue, Mr. Scott.
But behavioral health associates currently do not have educational requirements beyond a bachelor's degree. And going forward, it is important to consider introducing a minimum educational standard and ensuring that there are certain quality standards that are in place for our Medicaid members. Medicaid members are worthy of the same level of care as anyone else in our healthcare system, and it is significant if we continue to allow a bachelor's level of care to be the highest level of care that they receive when other people in the healthcare system, including other Medicaid members, are receiving care from individuals with masters and with doctorates and with who are licensed and certified and under the supervision of the boards of licensure that are currently in place and that have been put in place by statute. So that's a piece of the argument. Again, we are willing to stop and discuss this further. And we have had multiple meetings with our different interested parties, with the groups that did comment on the regulation, and we are willing to amend the regulation. But this is the serious issue here is Medicaid members do deserve a high degree of practitioner training. So that's just a very light beginning point.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Do any of our members have any questions or comments? Co-Chair West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just thinking from a common sense perspective, doesn't this proposed regulation at this time kind of ignore conditions on the ground, across the state? And this is in many job areas, not just this area, but we're at a point, it's like an emergency situation. We need warm bodies in these spaces to provide very basic services. And isn't the timing problematic? And aren't those legitimate concerns? Like if you lose 5% of the workforce, it doesn't increase the quality of care. It just eliminates care, period. So isn't the timing problematic for this right now?
I would respond to that and say that there are a lot of different services that individuals can provide in our system. That there are practitioners under supervision, there are paraprofessionals, there are multiple ways that people could continue to participate in the workforce. But asking them to be treating people as if they are a licensed and certified professional is a serious concern going forward, and it's going to be something that we have to consider as we go forward.
Senator Yates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, first of all, thank you for being here, and thank you for your agreement to defer this. I think this is a very complicated issue, and I'm glad that you're going to be able to sit down and talk. I can tell you that this is an area in which I have grown up around. My father was a graduate of the Healing Place and helped start the Easy Does It Club, and I've been involved in some way or another trying to help with recovery, and strongly believe in the miracle of recovery over the disease of addiction. And in order to do that, you have got to have places for people to be. And there's no arbitrary date when you can set them out, because they have to be able to, it's based on their oversight from people usually with an alphabet behind their name. And so I know that gets expensive, and I do know that it's hard to provide that. I refuse to believe that in Kentucky that we can't continue to provide the best services. So I'm hoping that maybe we could sit down and figure a way that we could have proper accountability and oversight to make sure that people are properly treated without losing our workforce, and making sure that they actually get treated, because that's the most important things, that when someone's ready to be able to move forward and be in a safe space, that they have that in place. So I think the agreement to defer and us sit down is ultimately this isn't a you gotcha or a who wins, because ultimately we're here for our constituents who are suffering. And so, again, I appreciate y'all's willingness to do that.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Bridges.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate you being here. I've got a few questions. One, how long has it been allowed for those with bachelor's degrees to be able to treat these patients?
We are proposing that, so it has been a longstanding practice in CMHCs. We are proposing to expand it to behavioral health services organizations as well. So going forward, there would be individuals who would still continue to have a bachelor's degree education, but who would be working towards a master's degree or a doctoral degree or something like that. So it's been some time that has been possible, but also as a quality issue going forward, it's problematic.
Well, my second question is, why did they do it in the first place? Why did this get started using those with bachelor's degrees?
Sure.
Any other questions from members of the subcommittee?
No, I've still got some more.
Oh, yeah, continue.
He wanted to chime in.
If I could.
Okay.
Yeah, I am Steve Shannon, and I'm with the Association of 11 of the 14 community mental health centers. And I've been accused of being a historian, and that's probably true. I got to CARP in 1997 for the association. That's 27 years ago. The mental health associate, now the behavioral associate, was in place at that time. And the origin of the mental health associate was the lack of graduate program availability and accessibility. So this was done, and I worked for the guy, I think it was done maybe the early 80s, mid 80s, to create a workforce going forward that would meet the needs, as we talked about, people's needs, because there just weren't enough licensed independent practitioners or enough programs. UK had one, U of L. But those were full-time jobs, full-time, you couldn't work and go that. So that's how the mental health associate was done. And it was done at the 14 community mental health centers. And over time, they've developed really strict oversight and regulations internally to who functions. There was a belief, I have a bachelor's degree in psychology, that I could get a job at a mental health center today and start therapy tomorrow. That is not the case. But that's the history of what happened with mental health associates. It was done to meet the need, and really throughout the Commonwealth. Lexington, Louisville, Northern Kentucky, they had access to licensed independent practitioners. Very few in the rest of the state. So that's the history. So it's at least 27 years, and probably 37 years they've been in place.
One more question, Mr. Chair. In that at least 27 years, what kind of specific problems have arisen out of the bachelors doing this, those with those degrees?
Well, we have heard of some cases where individuals are pressed into service immediately, and they are seeing individuals with severe, serious mental illness issues, maybe on their first day, maybe on their first week, and you can have situations there where individuals worsen, where their conditions worsen, where they have extremely bad outcomes, and so again, Medicaid members deserve to have licensed and certified individuals seeing them. And again, this is not the same situation that you had when an initial workforce had to be created. We have seen additional behavioral health and graduate programs come online over the intervening 40 years, and it's important to modernize in this situation.
Would it be fair to say that you will have sufficient health care services if you cut these out?
It's our belief, yes.
It's your belief.
Yeah.
If I could just take some personal comment here, Mr. Chairman. I just know that if, and it's certainly a different industry, but if the Commonwealth of Kentucky came to me and said, Mark, you're not going to be able to get a license to lobby the legislature unless you get your MBA. At age 56, I'm not going to get my MBA and I'm going to choose another career. So if there's not really, it doesn't appear to be a whole lot of issues or problems out there, and I would just ask for this reg to be found deficient.
Do one more question, Senator Yates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I know I keep tying this back into, because I do a lot with it. I try to find something personal that I know about, and where you have the dual diagnosis, where you have addiction and mental health issues together, and it's a major problem that we're facing, not just in Commonwealth of Kentucky, but in there. And as you guys work together, if we find this, if we defer and work together, maybe working, because obviously experience matters. And so you gave an example of, sometimes that there could be a grandfather then where someone already has a certain level of experience, and then a way that maybe we could help offset that educational model, or some type of credits. I know that when I started working at the AG's office, there was a way that kind of helped pay for the people's education that wanted to continue on. So this is something we need. I think that no one would sit here and say, no, we don't want a better educated workforce. We want that, but not at the expense of not having someone at all. So again, I just want to say I do appreciate that. I know it's not always easy when we come and we're lobbying from different areas, but I think we all have the same goal in mind.
Real quick, I know I said one last question, but I always appreciate the insights of my friend from Jefferson, Senator Rocky Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is a quick question. Didn't we pull back the master's regulation from social workers because we were having workforce issues, and now it's just required that they have a bachelor's? And so I don't know why we would think that this wouldn't have this same effect if we did that for social workers and we would behavioral health specialists.
The BSWs are under the social work board, so there's a way for them to be linked to providers and linked to a board, so we can integrate them into our workforce. We're talking about individuals who may not have any connection to a board whatsoever. And so that's another concern that we have, is that some of the licensing boards would be justified in pursuing some bachelors as individuals who are illegally practicing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. So today we're going to do two different motions. This has been going on for several months. We want all parties to come to the table. We understand, though, that eventually maybe you don't get to the point where you can compromise, and that's a harsh reality of this committee. We would appreciate, though, if you all would give it one last go, but in the case that you don't, we are going to make two motions today, and I'm going to need a second one for this one, but I'm going to make a motion to find these regulations deficient. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senator Rocky Adams. Senator Thayer.
Aye.
Senator Yates. Representative Bridges. Representative Frazier Gordon. Representative Herron.
No.
Senator West.
I'd like to explain my vote.
Please.
At this time, out of an abundance of caution, I don't think I have to abstain, but out of an abundance of caution, possible conflict, I hereby abstain.
Representative Lewis.
Yes.
With 5 votes carried, the motion, the two regs are found deficient.
Thank you. Now, we are going to make another one. Would the agency be willing to defer till next month?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a motion for deferral? Is there a second? Without objection, so ordered. Regulations deferred. Please get together, work things out if you can. If not, it will be found deficient. Thank you for your time. Madam Secretary, let's go to the air quality regulations.
Environmental, Department for Environmental Protection, Division of Air Quality. 401 KAR 50038. This has a staff suggested amendment.
401-50038 amends fee provisions for air emissions permits to remove the exemption for actual emissions if those emissions are greater than 4,000 tons for a single pollutant, and exempt an emission source from invoicing under certain conditions. The staff suggested amendment amends various sections to comply with KRS Chapter 13A.
Would you please identify yourselves for the record?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Tony Hatton. I'm the Commissioner of the Department for Environmental Protection.
Michael Kennedy. I'm the Director for the Division for Air Quality.
Good seeing you all. Thank you for coming here again. I know last month we kind of gave an overview. This month we do have a group that was here last month, and I was going to let them speak in opposition. Then if you all wanted to answer any questions or give a rebuttal, and then we will have questions from members of the committee.
All right.
I know we are pressed for time, so Chris.
So we'll just let them come to the table.
That'll work. Thank you all. Welcome. Please introduce yourselves for the record and please begin.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am Eric Gregory. I'm president of the Kentucky Distillers Association, and to my left is...
I'm Adam Goebel with Stahl, Keenan, Ogden. I'm counsel for the Kentucky Distillers Association. Also, full disclosure, I also am counsel.
Can you pull the mic up? Is that green light on?
Turn that on.
There you go. Okay.
Here we go. Thank you.
Am I okay? Adam Goebel, Stahl, Keenan, Ogden. I'm counsel for the Kentucky Distillers Association. Also, I'm not appearing with Heaven Hill, but I am counsel in another matter for Heaven Hill.
All right. Well, thank you all again for the opportunity to address this subcommittee on this proposed regulation. The other gentleman said he's often seen as historic. I'm actually in my 17th year as president of the KDA, and when I came to this job in 2008, we only had 7 distilleries in Kentucky, and to many people in the legislature at that time, bourbon was just seen as a revenue source. So let me say thank you to y'all over the past 10 years. Y'all have done more to cut bureaucratic red tape, to eliminate artificial barriers to commerce, and to lower taxes and fees, not only for businesses, but also our hardworking citizens in Kentucky than any legislature ever before. So we appreciate y'all's support. We now represent over 70 distilling companies in Kentucky that operate close to 100 locations in over 40 different counties. As y'all know, bourbon is a signature industry that is helping drive our economy and our tourism, employing more than 23,000 Kentuckians. And yes, we do pay our fair share of taxes, nearly $400 million a year, local and state, and almost $2 billion a year to the federal government. So with all that said, imagine our surprise a couple years ago when some of our distilling members got unexpected invoices from the cabinet, ranging upwards of $12,000 to over $500,000 for one distillery that you'll hear from in just a minute. We immediately began working with the cabinet to try to find a common sense solution for this issue. And let me say, we do appreciate their working with us for the last 2 years as we have explored an equitable remedy. And I want to be clear, we think the proposed regulation before you today is a good first step, but it doesn't solve the overall problem. And quite frankly, at least to us, it just really doesn't make good sense. Therefore, we believe the proposed regulation is deficient because it really just only goes part way. It creates an arbitrary distinction between emergency generators used for fire suppression and those used for fire safety and fire protection. It doesn't align with EPA definitions for emergency generators, which are rarely used, which actually makes it more stringent than federal law. It forces our distilleries and possibly other manufacturers to pay excessive emissions fees, even though, as I said, distilling is already the highest tax industry in the state. It puts Kentucky once again at a competitive disadvantage because no other state that we could find interprets the EPA regulations in this manner. And again, it just doesn't make good common sense. So before I turn it over to Adam and the other experts who can dive into this issue in as many technical and legal details as you want, let me just try to offer a quick summary kind of from a yeoman's point of view. So y'all know we have hundreds of barrel warehouses aging across the Commonwealth. They're kind of our version of pyramids, right? And if you're a standalone barrel warehouse in Kentucky, you do not pay emissions fees, all right? And likewise, there are standalone emergency generators throughout Kentucky used for a variety of different reasons, and they're either exempt from emissions fees or they pay a nominal amount each year. But you put an emergency generator near a warehouse, which many of them are for fire protection and fire safety and are required by insurance, then the cabinet believes it can charge emissions fees for that warehouse and any warehouses nearby, even though that emergency generator may only operate 30 minutes a month at best to make sure it's in good shape. So if something does happen, it's ready to go. So Heaven Hill got a surprise bill for $525,000 a couple years ago for its emergency generator for fire suppression and fire protection and prevention, like emergency venting to reduce the risk of a fire starting, or in another distillery's case, an emergency generator for emergency lighting to get the workers out safely. So DAQ is going to exempt emergency generators for fire pumps to put out the fire, but they're not going to exempt them for fire safety to let the workers out or to keep a fire from happening in the first place. And the EPA makes these emergency generators exempt from permitting. But the Division of Air Quality has decided to interpret that differently, making Kentucky's regulations more stringent than federal regs, and again, unlike any other state that we could find. So our question is, why would you exempt something to put out the fire, but you would not exempt the same thing to let your workers get out safely? And why would you exempt something to put out the fire, but you wouldn't exempt the exact same thing to make sure the fire didn't start in the first place? That doesn't make good sense. So again, there are now over 100 distilleries in 40 counties, and unfortunately, Heaven Hill has become the poster child for this issue, but I can assure you it affects more than just their distillery. And more importantly, it has the real risk of impacting future distilleries. And it's just another example of some outdated and non-competitive policies that has made in the past Kentucky unattractive to business. And again, this legislature has had the vision and the foresight to eliminate or resolve so we can get government out of the way and we can make the world's greatest whiskey. So for more information on addressing this situation, I'll turn it over to Adam Goebel with Stoll King and Ogden on behalf of the KDA.
Thank you. Well, while Eric said that that I would dive into the details, I think he hit the key points here. But the issue that we've got here, and I have to commend, working with Tony Haddon, working with Michael Kennedy over these years, we're very lucky to have public servants like those two. They truly strive to work hard and do the right thing. And here we're in a situation where, as Eric mentioned, you simply have emergency generators that a distillery, whether it's a small distillery or a larger distillery, they have to install. And you have to install them for fire code compliance. I mean, you cannot operate without these. Certainly if there's an incident and something goes wrong, certainly there's going to be quite a bit of liability associated with it. And you've got to protect your workers. You've got to protect the people, and you've got to protect the public. And when we commented on, when KDA commented on this proposed regulation, we were pointing out what the distinction, that this distinction does not make any sense. It makes no sense whatsoever to exempt an emergency generator that's installed simply for fire suppression, but you're not going to also exempt the emergency emissions that are from emergency generators that are installed for fire prevention. And we pointed this out, and frankly, in response, the cabinet just frankly ignored the arbitrary nature of this distinction. And that's ultimately the problem here, because we've got the cabinet, when you have an emergency generator, they operate the same, right? Because, and EPA has defined this. EPA has simply said, look, an emergency generator is a generator that operates less than 100 hours in a year. And that's how EPA defines them. And now, simply because, and this is important because I think there's a little bit of confusion at the last hearing, the emissions fees get charged simply because of the presence of the emergency generator. They're not installed or they're not assessed because of any operation associated with the emergency generator. So it's, as Eric pointed out, you have a warehouse standing alone, that you do not pay emissions fees whatsoever. It's simply due to the presence of this emergency generator that may operate a half hour a month just to make sure it's ready, that suddenly captures, then the cabinet just captures all the emissions associated with the warehouses, and you pay fees on all of the angel share emissions. And that's how you get these bills up to $500,000. So you can see for every barrel, whether you're starting distillery or you're a larger distillery, every barrel you add, your fees are just going to go up. And that's the way they've got to be thinking about this. And it doesn't make any sense. And so going back, when we commented on it, not only did the cabinet really not explain, and the cabinet has yet to give us a rational explanation for why are you exempting one use of fire suppression versus fire prevention. The cabinet acknowledged in its response to comments that a source should not be penalized for installing emergency generators for public protection purposes. The cabinet flat out said that. So they've reached the conclusion that a source shouldn't be penalized. But then it creates this arbitrary distinction between fire prevention versus fire suppression or worker safety. Public protection includes fire prevention, fire suppression, worker safety, all of these public protection reasons. And so the regulation should be consistent really with what the cabinet has already found in its response to comments, which is you don't get penalized, and we're not going to penalize these businesses for installing simply an emergency generator that has to operate per fire code, and we shouldn't be penalizing them, essentially putting a tax on them. And I want to make it clear, this isn't like a policy difference of, well, you're going to set a tax rate at 25%, 20%, you can have all these differences. This is, you've got completely similarly situated sources. If you have an emergency generator that's for fire prevention that operates in the exact same way as the source that's going to have an emergency generator for fire prevention, they're similarly situated. And the cabinet is just for reasons that have not been explained, essentially picking winners and losers for reasons that are not rational. And I've likened it. I think this committee wouldn't have any trouble finding a regulation deficient. For example, if the cabinet said, well, fine, if your company name starts with A through G, we're going to exempt it from fees. But if it still goes to H through Z, then we're not going to exempt it from fees. And that's essentially what we have here, because it doesn't make any sense. And it certainly doesn't make any sense in light of the Cabinet's already its determination that's in its response to comments that sources should not be penalized if they install these generators for public protection purposes. So there's a simple fix here. Be consistent for all these sources that install emergency generators for public protection purposes, fire prevention, fire suppression, worker safety. They all should be treated the same. And having a penalty just for doing this action does not make any sense. And not only is it arbitrary, as I've mentioned, and that's a perfectly valid reason for this panel to find it, for this committee to find it deficient, as this committee knows under the statutes, another reason for finding a regulation deficient if it poses an unreasonable burden on small business. And I think that this is perfectly clear that small business, you're paying hundreds of thousands of dollars simply because you install an engine for safety purposes that barely operates and does not have any significant emissions, on its own. So, and I can answer any other questions, but I can kick it over to Heaven Hill.
Yeah, please introduce yourself for the record and please begin.
Yeah, so I'm going to just introduce myself, and then we have a flyer for Heaven Hill to explain our specific situation. But I'm Jessica Pendergrass. I'm on the executive leadership team for Heaven Hill, and I'm general counsel and chief compliance officer for Heaven Hill. I'm going to hand it off to my colleague to comment while I hand these to you guys.
I'm Rachel Nally. I'm the director of environment sustainability for Heaven Hill. Thank you for hearing us today. Heaven Hill is a third generation family owned and operated company. We're a growing business. Most of our operations are located in Kentucky. My company's bottling and shipping facility in Bardstown, Kentucky holds a minor air source permit, and we take pride in our clean compliance record with the Division for Air Quality. In 2020, Heaven Hill added to its air permit several emergency engines. Following this addition, we received an invoice in the amount of $525,000. The following year, the invoice was $569,000. It's anticipated to be $783,000 next year, not because we have changed any equipment, but because we made more barrels of whiskey. For every barrel of bourbon we store in Nelson County, within a 10-mile radius of this bottling facility where there is an emergency generator, we are penalized with an additional fee. The assessment of this fee is and always has been inconsistent with federal law. When it was brought to the Cabinet's attention that my company was receiving these extravagant fees based solely on these emergency generators that run less than 1 hour per month for testing and that protect the facility from fire, the Cabinet attempted to address the issue with this proposed regulation, and we appreciate that attempt. However, as KDA has illustrated before me, they've drawn an arbitrary line between emergency engines that are solely for fire suppression and those that are for fire prevention. And so as a result, the penalty that we're being assessed for the mere presence of emergency generators is the same. If you'll look at the flyer that we just handed out, you can see on this map of Heaven Hill sites in Nelson County that our barrel warehouse sites are assessed no air emissions fees without emergency equipment, but excessive fees once the emergency equipment is placed on any of those properties. The Cabinet's proposed regulation would exempt Heaven Hill's emergency generators that are for fire suppression, sprinkler water, but not exempt the one emergency engine for fire prevention. That means that one emergency generator required by International Fire Code pulls the entirety of our property into the emission fee structure, requiring us to pay for the Angel's share from our aging inventory. This one unexempted remaining emergency engine was installed in 2020 to serve as backup power for a critical ventilation system. This ventilation system prevents the accumulation of flammable vapors inside the facility and in the event of a power outage, and mitigates a significant fire hazard, as well as protects the life of over 500 employees working inside that plant. It's also required by fire code. This one emergency engine is not located at a barrel house. It is at our bottling facility, yet it still triggers fee at all of our warehouse sites. The emergency engine has a total runtime on it of 30 hours. That's 30 hours over the course of 3.5 years since it was installed. That's less than 1 hour of operation per month, and given our emission fee of $569,000 this year, and the 9 hours that the engine ran last year, that means that my company essentially paid $63,000 an hour, $63,000 per hour of operation. Next year, that will increase to $87,000 per hour. Illogically, the emergency engines that pump sprinkler water and are exempt under the proposed regulation operate twice as much, 2 hours per month. But there's no actual tie to emissions to justify this regulation. Contrary to the Cabinet's proposal, US EPA equally exempts all emergency engines, regardless of whether they are for fire prevention or fire suppression. But the Cabinet does penalize distillers for having this emergency equipment. It's inconsistent with public policy, and it disincentivizes us from using basic protection equipment. Numerous distillers across the state are being penalized. KDA is here to talk on their behalf, but Heaven Hill is here testifying because we are the most egregious example of these extravagant fees. Heaven Hill famously survived a catastrophic fire in 1996 that was caused by lightning. 7 rick houses in the distillery were burned down, and so it's understandable that my company takes fire prevention very seriously. And it's no small matter to the family owners of our business that they're being assessed fees of over $500,000 to try and ensure future fire prevention. Under this proposed regulation, next year we're facing $783,000, a fee for one emergency generator required by fire code to prevent fire and ensure worker safety. This feels punitive. These extravagant fees divert funds from innovation and from implementation of sustainable practices that might actually reduce emissions. It also takes away my company's impetus to focus on innovative work in Kentucky. Administrative regulations cannot be arbitrary. The Cabinet's drawn an arbitrary line, as we've demonstrated, between sprinkler water used for fire suppression and the code-required practices that prevent fire in the first place. Further, your legislature has clearly expressed its intent that administrative regulations should not be more stringent than federal law. The Cabinet has promulgated regulations that are in fact more strict than the EPA, and this is layered on top of this arbitrary distinction. For these reasons, we believe you should find this regulation deficient. Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, just one other quick thing. We did propose an amendment to this in our comments when we filed them with DAQ earlier this year, and we have copies of those with us if anybody would like to take a look at those.
Thank you all for your presentation today. If you all don't care, I'm going to let Michael and Tony come back up, and if you all want to offer a rebuttal. And then Senator Thayer has questions.
And others.
Well, we certainly appreciate, I think it's true, Adam and others, and Stuart, that we have worked
Tony,
on
if you don't care, bring that mic forward a little
My
bit.
apologies.
Thank you.
What I was saying is we do appreciate the fact that, as Adam mentioned, in the kind words, that we have worked together quite a bit, I guess, over the last couple of years to try to figure out a way to make it more equitable and to actually lower the per ton emission fee in Kentucky. Some states have their air quality programs are funded where they have a combination of emission fees and permit fees. In Kentucky, it's emission fees. Just real quick, I don't want to take a lot of time, but 6-7 years ago, we looked at another way of maybe trying to tackle this by coming up with an emissions fee and permit fee way of doing things. But this air emission fee reg is like the dictionary definition of a cause and effect. If I make one change here, then that's going to result in an issue over here that I have to fix on the other side. So when we went to look at the ideal of a hybrid program, what we would have had to have done to lower our fees is we would have had to have gone down the ladder and started getting into a lot of small business conditional measures where they were going to have significant permit fees in order to make the math work out. We planned several public meetings, and we had one of those, and we realized very quickly that was going to affect a lot of people that didn't necessarily have an association to represent them, so we abandoned that ship. When, as was mentioned, it's true. I mean, Heaven Hill, one day there's a zero, and the next day it's $500,000, and that's understandable. That's eye-opening, and they certainly are looking to protect their interests as they ought to. And so we began to have conversations about, how could we move in a different direction, knowing all along we've always had a desire since I've been here to lower our per ton fee. So We even had conversations and provided information to our friends here about the effort that we took back in 2019. Never guaranteed that it would work, but we offered information, and you sort of come up with the same conclusion. If you go to a admission fee and permit fee, then there's going to be a whole lot of folks who have to pay a significant amount of permit fees that are then it's just going to increase the noise, particularly that you are going to hear from your constituents. So what we ended up doing, and I know there's a lot of conversation here that we just heard about the nuance between fire suppression and an actual fire pump that delivers water. I can honestly say with a clear conscience, when we were in those conversations, that's what I thought was in play. I thought that's exactly what we were looking at. So we saw this as an opportunity because we had interest to take a fresh look at our admissions fees. And our goal was ultimately to overall lower our admission fees, which this proposed reg would do, from around $142 a ton to around $116 a ton, while at the same time simultaneously trying to address some of the concerns that our friends have brought up. There's two changes in this reg. One is the removal of the 4,000 ton cap. That was primarily for the specific purpose of lowering the per ton admission fee for those who have to pay in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. The second part of it, we had conversations with folks that we permit. Let's say that I've got a facility here, as is mentioned by Heaven Hill, I've got a facility here where I have that emergency generator that has got them in the fee structure. But let's say I have rick houses that are not contiguously located in several distance around it where I have a fire pump. What this regulation does is that those areas that are not contiguous to this area, we'll set this argument aside for a second, although I know that's what we're here to talk about or what we're going to try to resolve or is going to be resolved in some venue. What the reg does is it allows those areas, those satellite areas where you have a fire pump, to be disconnected from this one. And so we met, we talked, and we currently have an application in-house that would disconnect those particular facilities from this one, and those would no longer be subject to emissions fees for any emissions that might be coming from those warehouses. And at some point, depending on how this goes, we need to talk about that current application that we have, because it could have implications if this doesn't go forward. So that was what we tried to accomplish, was to reduce what Heaven Hill has to pay for fire pumps that are not contiguously located. I know that sounds like a fine detail. Now, also, and I'm not an attorney and I don't fully understand this, but I think we definitely, I supplied information to you all that showed that we would reduce their overall fees that they would have to pay if this goes through and they get that permit modification, which they should get. But having said that, I forgot what my next statement was going to be. It's a sign of age, I guess. So what we felt like we accomplished is we lowered the per ton emission fee. Now, after the last meeting we had, we went back and did some math and said, what if we extended this to emergency generators? Because there are other emergency generators that are out there. And what kind of hole would that create? And it would create a hole. And the way to fill that hole in is then to go back and raise the per ton emission fees from, instead of 142 to 116, it'd be 142 to 121. So I think we might have a little bit of disagreement here as to exactly how we interpret the applicability of emergency generators. And I also think, and maybe Adam can clarify this too, I think that particular topic is a subject of a request for hearing between the Office of Administrative Hearings, and that may end up being the place in which it is vetted out. It's very complicated. He knows more and they know more than I do. I just know that was my understanding when we went into this, and that may end up being the venue to work that out more properly. I don't know what happens here in the meantime. But I guess at this point, that's really all I've got to say, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner, I appreciate your testimony. We do have several questions. I know one of our members has to leave soon, so we're going to start off with him. Senator Thayer, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's your lucky day, Commissioner. Your testimony is actually pretty troubling because you admit on more than one occasion that you don't fully understand the subject matter.
Yes, sir. That's why I have him. But I do understand the concept. I'm very aware of the concept.
You understand the concept that it appears that you're singling out one of Kentucky's two signature industries with punitive regulations that has every other business in Kentucky here celebrating because their fees are going to go down, while an industry that is still in growth mode and creating jobs in tourism facilities across Kentucky is going to be penalized for doing the right thing, and you're breaking the law by making it more difficult, more stringent than federal EPA law. Can you explain that?
Nothing more than I've already explained.
Yeah, what you've explained is that this committee should find this regulation deficient unless you're willing to defer it and continue to work with the distilling industry to try to find a fair solution that doesn't break existing Kentucky law.
So are we requesting the agency defer the reg? Is that a?
If you don't, I'm going to make a motion to find it deficient.
Yes, sir. I'm not in a position. I'd have to respectfully decline deferring the reg, Senator.
Why? Why are you've admitted in your testimony just moments ago that there is area in which the two sides can come together, but you're not willing to defer the reg and work in a multilateral fashion to come up with a solution. And if you can't tell, you kind of pissed me off today.
My apologies, sir. It's not my intent. Honestly.
Then what is your intent here today?
My intent,
because it appears that you're singling out one industry for punitive action to the benefit of everybody else.
the way the proposed reg would work is that the industry that is troubled by this regulation, which you understand would actually be paying less, considerably less than what they...
Mr. Chairman, this gentleman started out his testimony by admitting that on one day the charge to Heaven Hill is zero and the next day it's $500,000. There's no way that we as a committee can allow this regulation to go forward. It breaks a law that was put into place by a past General Assembly, some of whom of us were probably members of at the time. I move that we find this regulation deficient, Mr. Chairman.
Before we get to that motion, there are several other questions I'd like to get to first, but I do have a question for you, Commissioner.
Yes, sir.
You know, Senator Thayer makes a lot of good points. And should a motion of deficiency be made, and should this, should the regulation before us get struck down, how would that impact the distillers as a whole, as an industry? Would they still be paying more or less as a whole?
If the proposed amendments are...
And real quick, I would remind you, should an existing proposed regulation be struck down, it would default back to the previous one that's in effect.
Yes, sir, that's my understanding.
Right.
Yes, sir.
So what would that look like?
That would look like $142 per ton. And as Heaven Hill indicated, the additional money that they would be paying, that's what the resulting bill would be, unless something changes between now and then. That would...
So I feel for the distillers. I really do. They make a convincing case. We've had several conversations. I guess my question, though, is should we not do something in statute when we come back in session? And should we find this deficient today? And should we strike this down in Senate Bill 65? The way I read the report, the distillers would actually pay more because they hadn't been paying this in several years. Is that correct?
Some distillers have been paying this fee for quite a few years.
Right.
Absolutely. A good
So
many of them
I
have.
worry about the unintended effect of that. But other members have questions. Co-Chair West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to take a little bit different tact right now. I'm going to attempt to get some information out there. I asked this last month, and you all weren't prepared. Not that you weren't prepared, you just didn't have the information at the time. So I'm going to ask it again. So what is, I guess I'm specifically asking for numbers on the air quality, the budget.
Right.
I'm assuming this is just for one budget unit, correct? The money for this, the fees from this goes to that budget unit.
Absolutely. It's a
Do you know
restricted
what
fund.
those numbers are?
I think the budget request this year is in the neighborhood of $19 million to run the program.
So $19 million that comes from fees, this program?
Comes from emissions fees.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So after, let's say this reg went into effect, what would that new budget be? What are you thinking it would be?
It would be the same. The
Be
cost
the
of the
same.
program's the same. It's just the per ton fee would be changed, but it would result in the same amount of money no matter which way we go here, whether we stay with what we have or the amended regulation.
And so we haven't. I'm going on a tangent now. Okay, so
Yes,
we
sir.
haven't talked about this, but it's a very important component of it. How does this affect our utilities? If this moves forward, how does it affect our utilities?
There will be some utilities who will see a significant increase because of the removal of the 4,000 ton cap capacity, and there will be a small handful that will actually see a decrease because they've decreased their emissions moving from coal-fired to natural gas.
So could you talk about that real quick? That coal-fired natural gas component, is that?
Well, there's less emissions from a natural gas unit than a coal-fired unit, and so they pay based on tons of emissions.
Right. So in other words, this is going to be a significantly higher fee on our coal power plants, I'm assuming.
For TVA, one LG&E KU unit that's not in Jefferson County, and a smaller amount of money for big rivers, mainly TVA.
Would these utilities be able to pass along these increased fees to ratepayers?
They are by law allowed to pass these fees along to ratepayers.
So this would go directly to the consumer.
Yes, sir, it would.
Okay. So how much? Let's take. I'm going to use an easy example. Okay. So how much would it take to do all the work that the cabinet needs to do to implement this reg as it pertains to, let's say, Heaven Hill? So I don't need an exact number, but just like boots on the ground, what do you have to do to? I mean, so you have to drive out there and check the generator, or whatever
To do inspections.
Yeah.
Well, we do periodic inspections. The difference here is some of your bigger emitters are paying more money because they're emitting more. That doesn't mean that they're more costly to permit. It doesn't mean that they're more costly to inspect. They might be bigger, so it takes more time to do an inspection. But at the end of the day, the cost really increases with the amount of tons of emissions that you have.
Okay. So you've answered my question. So I'm going to make a statement. You can tell me if I'm wrong, if in your opinion. So this fee, in reality, has nothing to do whatsoever with the cost to the state of implementation of the program. It's a fee based on, theoretically, on emissions, polluting. Okay.
Yes.
Is that a fair statement?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So where I'm a bit confused is, what are the distilleries emitting? Like the generator is running, they're testing it once a month.
Right.
It can't be that much emission generation. Why would Heaven Hill have a $500,000 fee for zero to no emissions on a required emergency apparatus, I guess?
The fee would be paid based on the VOC emissions from their facilities and from their warehouses.
So do any other states charge for those VOC emissions like this?
They do, and even in some states, and I'm going to go ahead and bring this up because I want to make sure everybody understands that we're not opposed to our friends that are in this business. We have long held and continue to hold the position that emissions from rick houses are fugitive emissions and not non-fugitive emissions like some of our surrounding states do. And, at some point in time, EPA believes they're non-fugitive emissions. Indiana does. We don't agree with that. And the reason we don't agree with that is because we think you can make a reasonable conclusion that they're fugitive emissions. If they're non-fugitive emissions, then every warehouse becomes its own Title V PSD permitted facility. And then all of a sudden, then it's really an inequitable burden on the distilling industry. So it's the fee, the higher fees are because of the tons of emissions.
And so when you talk about volatile organic compounds, whatever.
Right. Ethanol in this case, primarily ethanol.
VOCs.
Yes, sir.
Are we kind of? I'm a cattle farmer, so there's a lot of talk about methane emissions and all that stuff. My terrible cows are destroying the planet. Aren't we playing into the EPA's hands a little bit by moving towards taxing this angel share, basically. Is it really as bad as some of these other actual pollutants? I mean, actual chemical, coal smog going into the air. Is it? Are we going there? Is that what we're doing here?
That's certainly not our intention. I mean, emissions from distillery operations they're subject to the Clean Air Act, and they have been charged emissions fees for years. The situation we're in right now is where we had one of our stakeholders that went from $0 to $500 and some $1,000, which is understandable why they're in the position that they're in. But the fact that emissions fees have been paid for volatile organic emissions from a distillery is nothing new.
Gotcha.
This particular issue here is what's ripened this conversation up, and I certainly understand it.
Thank you.
Any other members with questions?
If I can make a few follow-up comments, I'm also chair of the KDA, so the chair of the board, in addition to being on the executive team for Heaven Hill. I just want to say, I know it keeps being brought about to Heaven Hill and that this is our issue, and obviously we said we have the most egregious fees, but I do want to reiterate what Eric Gregory said at the front end, which is we have other distillers in the state paying anywhere from $10,000 to $250,000 to $300,000 on their emissions because of an emergency generator and for no other reason. In our case, it happens to be for evacuating high ethanol emissions out of a tank room and a bottling line. For some, it's for emergency egress lighting so that they can safely get tourists and workers out of a building. For some, it's, again, a warehouse that might be cycling air and has to get those ethanol vapors out of a warehouse in order to ensure safety for people on the ground. So it's not just Heaven Hill. There's many of us. I also want to circle back to exactly what this E-reg does as it relates to the distilling industry. Prior to the proposal, the distilling industry paid 25% of that $19 million budget. After the E-reg and exempting only fire suppression generators, we are still paying 24% of that air emissions budget. So the distilling industry as a whole across Kentucky is paying $5 million of that $19 million budget that we're talking about.
Real quick, which E-reg were you referring to?
I'm sorry, regulation. Sorry.
Yeah, what's it an ordinary or emergency?
No, I'm sorry. I was talking about this regulation, not
Okay, it's ordinary. Okay.
Could I make just one other comment? I think a key point that Commissioner Hatton made is that, so the cabinet has a goal of getting down the per ton fee. And the cabinet ran the numbers, as I understood. I want to make sure I don't want to misspeak. But currently, if you put the reg through the way it currently is with the arbitrary distinction in it, they can take it down to $116 per ton. But if you eliminate that distinction and exempt the emergency generators in a consistent manner, that the per ton fee still goes down. It goes down to $121. So we've just got a $5 difference. And with saying where we stand here, to me, that sounds like a traditional win-win type situation. So.
Senator Yates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A lot of times when we ask to defer it so we can sit down and talk and figure out how to have a compromise, as we're having this discussion, I hear you talking about what we may have a compromise. My worry is if we do deficient today, then we fall back and maybe some of our ratepayers that have been paying may get stuck paying something higher. If maybe the industry pays higher. But the two of you we talked about maybe removing the arbitrary and capricious distinction, and you still get down to 121 per ton. If we could defer, it seemed like we could come to an agreement. I don't see any dispute on that, but I guess I'll just get feedback. Is that something that could happen?
Could you all just tell me a little bit on the agency amendment, what exactly it would do? Or not agency amendment, but the proposal that you all had.
Oh, sure. We've proposed, there's frankly two ways to do it. I think a straightforward way to do it would be you can follow language to where if you install an emergency generator, use the regulatory language for it. And then if it's installed, but if it's installed for public protection purposes, including without limitation, fire suppression, fire prevention, worker safety, that those are, you will not pay fees for those purposes. I think something along the lines of that would work. Or you could just go straight forward and just say if you install an emergency generator as defined by EPA and these regulations, that you don't pay fees on that.
Co-Chair West.
I want to circle back to Senator Yates' question, and I don't think we got a real answer to it. Just thinking out loud, I mean, the proposal by Mr. Goebel to do the carve out or the exemption, do the carve out, do the exemption, and you go from 142 to 121. That sounds like a really, really easy compromise. Am I thinking wrong, Mr. Hatfield, on that? Would that not be a really simple solution to this? And
on its face, it certainly would appear to be.
So why can't we do that, I guess?
So in the event we were to defer the reg, how would that process work out? What would we do?
Procedurally, we would just do an amendment. Right, you'd be back here next month. If you agree to deferral, we could do an agency amendment that could be approved in this committee, and then if you'll just stand at ease for a second, how? So I had to. So just for clarification, after talking with staff, I want to make sure I was correct, okay?
Yes, sir.
So if it were to happen that way, you would have to agree to defer. Then there would be an agency amendment drafted to reflect that. And then next month, it would be accepted or rejected in this committee. And we would go on down the road. There wouldn't be any delay or extra notice provisions or anything like that. Before we get to that stage, there is a motion on the table that Senator Thayer would have to agree to pull back before we got to that point. But that's procedurally what we're looking at.
Well, my apologies. My apologies, I didn't, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Thayer.
I will agree to recede from my motion for deficiency if the agency will agree to defer. If they do not agree to defer, I'm not going to recede from my motion to find this reg deficient right here, right now.
Any word, Commissioner?
The agency will agree to defer the regulation and meet with Kentucky Distilleries. I want to make sure, though, that everybody understands there will be other parties that feel like they're not getting exactly what they were looking to get. I understand the argument, and I agree to defer.
I understand. Thank you, Commissioner. Senator Thayer.
Mr. Chairman, I withdraw my motion to find this reg deficient. I'm very pleased with the action of the Commissioner to meet with the affected parties and be back here next month. Thank you.
And so just for our purposes, Commissioner, the agency would be willing to defer the regulations, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely, and we should talk very, very shortly about an opportunity to sit together in the room and work out what proposed language would look like.
Thank you for all parties involved. Is there a motion for deferral? Second. Without objection, so ordered. Regulations deferred. Thank you all for coming. Cassie, you ready over there? You're usually first. Madam Secretary, let's jump back to the beginning and we'll start this thing from the beginning.
Education Professional Standards Board, 16 KAR 1030, 2030. Those are okay, but we also have 16 KAR 9010, 80, and 100, all with staff suggested amendments.
161030 is being amended to specify requirements for processing complaints against certificate holders and update statutory references. 2030 is being amended to include certification requirements for all 3 substitute teaching certificates, update the priority selection process, and remove the emergency non-certified personnel program as House Bill 387 allows these individuals to qualify for the 1-year emergency certificate. 9010 is being amended to establish the application requirements and renewal process for an Option 1 provisional certificate. 9080 is being amended to remove language relating to the Kentucky Teacher Internship Program and require that a candidate for the Option 6 alternative route to teacher certification have a recommendation from the employing school district prior to issuance of the professional certificate. 9100 is being amended to revise the application requirements for issuance and renewal of a temporary Option 7 provisional certificate. The staff amendments amend various sections to comply with the drafting and formatting requirements of KRS 13A, correct statutory citations, comply with the board's statutory authority, and make technical changes.
Would you please identify yourself for the record?
Cassie Trueblood, counsel for the EPSB.
Thank you for coming today. There are staff amendments. There's a motion for approval of the staff amendments. Without objections, so ordered. Any questions from members of the subcommittee? Seeing none, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Teachers Retirement System, 102 KAR 138. Also 350 and 370, those two have staff suggested amendments.
102-1138 establishes the procedures for crediting interest to each TRS 4 members' account. 1350 is being amended to provide details for paying the full actuarial cost of health insurance. 1370 establishes the process for and rules of annuitization and distribution from the supplemental benefit component for TRS 4 members. The staff amendments add clarifying language and make changes to comply with the drafting requirements of KRS 13A.
Would you please identify yourself for the record?
Yes, good afternoon. Bo Barnes, Deputy Executive Secretary and General Counsel for the Teachers Retirement System.
Thank you for coming. There are staff amendments. There's a motion for approval of the staff amendments. Is there a second? I'll second. Without objection, so ordered. Are there any questions from members of the subcommittee? Seeing none, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Kentucky Public Pensions Authority, 105 KAR 140 and 142. Both of these have agency amendments and staff suggested amendments.
105-1140 is being amended to add details of the administrative duties and reporting requirements. 1142 establishes limitations and exclusions on increases in credible compensation in the last 5 years of service for retiring members with a membership date prior to January 1st, 2014. The staff amendments amend various sections to comply with the drafting requirements of KRS 13A and make technical changes. The agency amendments add clarifying language and update material incorporated by reference.
We're switching gears a little bit. I'm the new guy. Would you please identify yourself for the record? If you could turn that microphone on there, please, sir.
Dewan Surratt, Director of Employee Reporting and Compliance Education.
Carrie Bass, Staff Attorney Supervisor, Office of Legal Services for the KPPA.
And Jessica Bobian, Policy Specialist for the KPPA.
Thank you so much. There are staff amendments. Do we have a motion for approval of the staff amendments? We have a motion and a second. Without objection, it is so ordered. There are also agency amendments. Are there any questions or discussion on the agency amendments? Seeing none, is there a motion for approval of the agency amendments? We have a motion. We have a second. Without objection, it is so ordered. Any questions from members on this set of regulations from the Kentucky Public Pension Authority? Seeing none, thank you so much.
Boards and Commissions, Board of Nursing, 201 KAR 20056 and 215 with staff suggested amendments, 230 and 390. 390 also has staff suggested amendments.
201 KR 20056 implements House Bill 459 from the 2024 regular session of the General Assembly by establishing provisional licensure of advanced practice registered nurses who have not yet passed their national certification exams. This amendment establishes the application process, requirements, and limitations for advanced practice registered nurse applicants, APRNAs. The staff suggested amendment makes technical corrections to comply with the drafting requirements of KRS Chapter 13A. 201 KR 20-215 amends requirements to include one-time continuing education on the topics of dementia and Alzheimer's disease consistent with House Bill 459 from the 2024 regular session of the General Assembly, and clarify the timelines provided to complete other continuing education. The staff suggested amendment makes technical corrections to comply with the drafting requirements of KRS Chapter 13A. 201 KR 20-230 amends provisions to require nursing license renewal applications be submitted online by the established deadline and removes provisions relating to the paper submittal of renewal applications. 201 KR 2390 amends provisions to require proof of continued enrollment and graduation of scholarship award recipients instead of the transcripts of award recipients, include nurses who are enrolled part-time in the scholarship program, prioritize past recipients during the selection process, and rank financial need consistent with the FAFSA Simplification Act of 2020. Material incorporated by reference is also being updated to clarify repayment provisions and for consistency with the administrative regulation. The staff suggested amendment makes technical corrections to comply with the drafting requirements of KRS Chapter 13A.
Would you please identify yourselves for the record?
Kelly Jenkins, Executive Director, Kentucky Board of Nursing.
Yes, good afternoon, Jeff Prather, General Counsel, Board of Nursing.
Thank you all for coming today. There are staff amendments. Is there a motion for approval of the staff? Is there a second?
Second.
Without objection, so ordered. Are there any questions from members of the subcommittee? Sorry, guys, we've talked a lot today. Thank you for coming.
Okay.
Thank you.
Please
Thank
call
you.
the next regulation.
Kentucky Housing Corporation 202 KAR 2020 emergency. This does not have additional amendments.
202 KR 2020E amends Rural Housing Trust Fund loan or grant program provisions to include among the list of applications to be prioritized application projects that serve federally declared disaster areas, create new housing supply, would be located in rural areas with significant job growth, would be located in counties shown to have a housing supply gap, or include awarded local contributions.
Would you please identify yourself for the record?
Sam Thorner, General Counsel for Kentucky Housing Corporation.
Thank you for coming today. There are no amendments to this regulation. Are there any questions from members of the subcommittee? Seeing none, thank you for coming. Please call the next regulation.
Justice and Public Safety Cabinet, Department of Corrections, 501 KAR 6021, 280, 300, 310, 320, 340, 350, 360, 370, 380, 390, 400, 420, 430, 440, 450, 460, 470, 480, 490, 500, 510, 520, 530, and 540. All except 21, 280, 350, 480, and 540 have staff suggested amendments.
This package of regulation from the department establishes, repeals one large regulation and relocates the various requirements, policies, and procedures into individual regulations, including on risk and needs assessment, news media, inmate funds, diet, healthcare, communication, mail, visiting, personal property, library service and religious programs, research, records and record requests, notification, security and discipline, restrictive housing, classification, work program, release preparation, and mentor service programs. The staff suggests an amendment amend various sections to comply with the drafting requirements of KRS Chapter 13A.
Would you please identify yourselves for the record?
Good afternoon, Nathan Goins with the Justice and Public Safety Cabinet, Staff Attorney.
Allison Brown, Assistant General Counsel for Corrections.
Dr. Russ Williams, the Director of Mental Health for the Department of Corrections.
Thank you all for coming today. There is a staff amendment. Is there a motion for approval of the staff? Without objection, so ordered. Real quick, we do have someone signed up to speak in opposition. If you all want to let them come up to the table. Thank you all for coming. Please introduce yourself, and you're free to present.
Thank you. I'm Jeff Edwards. I'm the director of the Kentucky Protection and Advocacy Division. And joining me today is Kevin Sharkey, who will be providing today's comments.
Is that mic on? Is that green light on?
Sorry.
You're good.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the committee. I'm here to comment on 501 KAR 6340, which deals with research and information, specifically CPP 5.1. A few years back, the policy was amended to allow for medical research, which was disallowed before then. And P&A commented on those policies, and we said that our comment was that the inherently coercive environment of prison makes it hard to get voluntary consent. And then you couple that with a person with mental illness, intellectual disabilities, or traumatic brain injury, and it's hard to make sure that their consent to a medical research is truly voluntary. So we asked that protections be put in place before a person with diminished capacity can consent to a medical research. We ask that protections be in place to make sure that their consent is truly voluntary. And to the Department of Corrections' credit, they added those protections. They added a clause that stated prior to inclusion in a research study, a person suspected of having an intellectual disability shall be screened to determine his or her ability to understand the information relevant to making an informed voluntary decision to participate. With the latest amendments, they've taken that language out, and their reasoning was that they don't have enough staff in the jails. They omitted it because it would work to prevent offenders in the communities and the jails from participating, as there is not enough mental health staff. We disagree with the department's decision to take out these protections for persons with diminished decision-making capacity, and we ask that they put those back in. Well, we ask that the regulation be found deficient and they revert back to the old regulation that added those protections for persons with disabilities, mental health disabilities. Shall I comment on the other two that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
We do have a member or two with a question, but go ahead and we'll circle back.
Okay.
Please continue.
The second regulation I'd like to comment on is 501-6380. It incorporates Corrections Policy and Procedure 10.2, dealing with special management and restrictive housing. I'm here asking that the regulation be amended to exclude inmates with serious mental illness from being placed in extended restrictive housing. There is decades of research that shows that prolonged solitary confinement for individuals with serious mental illness takes a toll on their psyche. It can be devastating. It causes symptoms of hallucinations, severe anxiety, paranoia, depression, and increased risk of suicide. There are several professional and mental health organizations that have come out against prolonged isolation for persons with serious mental illness. Those include the American Psychiatric Association, the National Commission on Correctional Health Care, and the National Alliance on Mental Illness. Kentucky has recognized that, well, the DLC has recognized that prolonged isolation is detrimental to vulnerable groups. So in the latest amendments, they banned inmates under 18 and female inmates that are pregnant or immediately postpartum from prolonged isolation. So they recognize that those vulnerable groups face significant risks to their mental health, including increased likelihood of psychological trauma, self-harm, psychosis, and suicide. So since 2009, 42 states have established laws restricting prolonged segregation for persons with serious mental illness. One of those states, Nebraska, statute states that inmates who belong to vulnerable populations are not to be placed in long-term restrictive housing. They may only be placed in immediate segregation for no more than 30 days for safety reasons or pending classification. Their definition of vulnerable population includes individuals who are under 18, individuals who are pregnant, and individuals diagnosed with serious mental illness, developmental disabilities, or traumatic brain injuries. There's current lawsuits in Pennsylvania and New York seeking to end prolonged solitary confinement for individuals with serious mental illness. And several federal courts have ruled that placing people with serious mental illness in solitary confinement violates the cruel and unusual punishment clause found in the 8th Amendment to the United States Constitution. So today we're asking that the regulation be amended to include people with serious mental illness, to exclude them from prolonged isolation. It'll be beneficial to those inmates, and it will reduce the risk of future costly litigation. We've made strides in protecting our most vulnerable. Now we must extend that protection to those who suffer from mental illness. And the third regulation that I'll be commenting on is 501-6400. It incorporates Policy 1313, Mental Health Services. We're asking that this amendment be deferred so that we can have further conversation with the Department of Corrections regarding the definition that they use for serious mental illness. We think that that definition is too narrow and fails to capture some inmates that are suffering from serious mental illness, which causes them not to get the treatment that they need. Their current definition almost requires that the inmates be observably psychotic to qualify as having a serious mental illness. The definition states that serious mental illness is defined by a diagnosis of schizophrenia, severe depression disorders, severe forms of bipolar disorders, and major neurocognitive disorders. Also, a duration of 1 year and significant functional impairment documented in medical records and observable by custody or mental health staff. We think this is too narrow. It overlooks some inmates who suffer from serious mental illness who may not display that they're suffering from it. For example, an inmate with severe depression may not consistently display psychotic symptoms, but still requires treatment to manage their condition. In 2001, the National Institute for Mental Health estimated that 5.5% of the United States population and 6.2% of Kentucky's population have an SMI. There's national organizations that have estimated that anywhere from 10 to 25% of U.S. prisoners suffer from SMI, serious mental illness. Despite this, the DOC reported to us in March that only 292 of their 12,796 prisoners, or 2.28%, are severely mentally ill. Those numbers do not align with national averages, and they don't align with my experience and observations from going to the prisons. For example, I went to a prison once and I observed an inmate eating his feces and drinking his urine. And when I asked staff what his diagnosis was, they said he doesn't have one. It's just behaviors. Now, I'm not a mental health professional, but those aren't behaviors that I notice in persons that aren't diagnosed with at least some kind of mental illness. The consequences of this narrow definition means fewer inmates qualify for mental health services, leading to untreated conditions, exacerbation of symptoms, and negative outcomes such as self-harm, suicide, and difficulty integrating back into society after release. Without proper care, these inmates face higher risk of disciplinary problems, solitary confinement, and recidivism. Our agency has mothers that call us all the time, worried about their children who have, on the outside, been diagnosed with serious mental illness, but on the inside are not receiving proper care or are being held in solitary confinement for prolonged periods. We ask that this regulation be deferred. Well, first I want to talk about the American Correctional Association's definition that we suggest that the Department of Corrections use. The Department of Corrections seeks accreditation from the American Correctional Association, and their definition defines serious mental illness as psychotic disorders, bipolar disorders, major depressive disorders, or any diagnosed mental disorder causing serious impairment in psychological, cognitive, and behavioral functioning. This definition acknowledges that inmates with SMI may not display psychotic symptoms, but still require treatment to manage their condition. It's important to note that symptoms of serious mental illness can be minimized, or the person can reach recovery, but recovery is not synonymous with cured. They still require treatment and assessments on whether isolation will exacerbate those symptoms. So we ask that we believe that a diagnosis from a mental health provider is a more accurate and reliable indicator of serious mental illness. We ask that this be deferred. Well, we ask that the Department of Corrections use the definition that is used by the American Correctional Association. If this will help ensure that inmates, particularly those with mental health conditions, receive appropriate care. A broader definition of mental illness would align with the ACA standards. It will ensure they get proper treatment, and it will reduce the risk of future costly litigation by ensuring compliance with the United States Constitution. Thank you.
I appreciate your all's testimony today. I don't have a question, but I do appreciate the passion, and that's what this committee is for public comment, and it tends to craft good policy. My co-chair, Senator West, does have questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. These are very, very important considerations that we're talking about here today. My question is in regards to 6340, the research, medical research per se. Give us a little bit more detail about what we currently do, and then what this reg does. Are you stating that you would like to see us return to status quo, or do you want a new regime different than what's here and different than what we're currently doing? I just need a little bit more detail on what we're doing.
So a couple of years back, the regulations excluded medical prisoners from medical research, and they added it back. They added that now they can do medical research. I'm not sure what that includes, but we just wanted protections to make sure that persons with disabilities, that they're having a disability coupled with the inherently coercive environment, they need extra protections to make sure that their consent to any medical research, which we know the history of medical research in prisoners and things like that.
Right.
So we want to make sure that people with diminished decision-making capacity that their decision is truly voluntary. And they had added.
And what do you propose? How do you determine that? How do you determine their diminished capacity?
Well, what they had added in the regulations after our comments said that they'll just be screened to determine by a mental health professional to determine if they're.
So your position is it would be a fairly subjective measure of mental capacity, and it needs to be more of an objective standard. Is that
correct? Okay. Just go back to the inmate being screened to make sure that their consent is voluntary.
Oh, okay. I misunderstood. Right. So you have a proposal that you're talking about. Go to the status quo is what you're saying, and
right. Any inmate
don't enact this particular provision.
Correct. Don't get rid of the clause that states that an inmate with an intellectual disability, traumatic brain injury, or a serious mental illness be screened before they.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right.
That's what I was unsure of. You answered my question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Co-Chair. I'm going to let the department respond now, but I do appreciate y'all's testimony. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, I don't need to talk. I just would like to be here.
You're welcome to respond. Thank you.
So I will do a brief introduction here, and I'll pass it back over to Dr. Williams, who is much smarter than I am. For the first concern that they voiced dealing with research, so the policy itself still requires that there be an institutional review board, and that's required by our federal regulations. And one of the requirements from 45 CFR 46.116 states that before a participant participates in research, that the researcher obtain legally effective informed consent, which would consider capacity to consent, right? So within the reg, we cite there are multiple layers. First, there's multiple layers of review of this, and there aren't very many requests for research opportunities within DOC to begin with, so it's very rare at the outset. But secondly, beyond the review process, multiple layers of review process, any type of research that's done does require that they follow the federal regulations, like I said, that require the Institutional Review Board, which would require legally effective consent before it even begins. So that we thought would address those concerns that they have. One of the issues with using a screening process is that a lot of the inmates that are included in inmates are in local jails and out in the community. And there's not really a good way for us to provide a screening process for those, which would in effect eliminate them from opportunities for research, which may benefit them in some way. So we thought it would be better to remove that provision because it's already included in the other provisions at the outset. I can take questions about that if you'd like.
On that particular issue, when we talk about research, are you talking about cases where if you're part of this research study, it allows you to be part of a group that gets this particular medication that benefits you? Is that what you're talking about?
I think
when you say it benefits them?
There could be instances where that would happen. Could be opportunities. I think that was part of the consideration that we made when making the determination, is that precluding them just because of a perceived disability isn't necessarily the best route, especially whenever that disability or incapacity to consent is already considered within the process before it even begins.
But what harm would a screening process cause in that situation? If you make it through if they make it through the screening, they're still able to receive the research testing, correct?
Well, like I said, there may be instances where an inmate who is not within an institution that has access to the medical care could not be screened to begin with. So they may be out in the community or maybe out in a county jail where they don't have access to those resources.
Okay, and how's this being handled now, currently, in these situations? My understanding from the prior testimony is there are screeners now, and
I'll answer that if that's okay. So Dr. Williams, Director of Mental Health for the Department of Corrections. So currently there are multiple layers with regards to any type of research that's requested through the Department of Corrections. The first layer goes through our IRB that looks at exactly what you're talking about. Is the research has it cleared the university or the agency that is already requesting for the research to take place? So that's the first level of review. The next level of review actually comes to me, in which I have to look at and review to make sure that there's not going to be any adverse reactions or any type of traumas or anything that would adversely affect any of the offenders within our custody. And so if I agree with that, then it goes to the commissioner's office, and then she and her committee look at it again to make sure that they agree with the recommendations from the two levels below her, and then she ultimately has the decisional capacity to say yes or no. But if you think about research, so I've been in my position now since I came back in 2019. We've had 3 requests for research, none of it medical or pharmacologically driven. Usually it is university students who are wanting to look at characteristics of like antisocial behavior, and so do a survey for offenders. The last one that was requested I actually denied because it was a singular case study for female offenders who had reoffended for a sexual offense. And because it singled her out, I felt like it could, if that went to publication, it would single her out. And wasn't for sure if that would be in her best interest. So I hope I'm answering the question. So there's multiple levels of research.
And you feel the inmates have full ability to legally consent to any of these type situations.
Correct. And if they didn't, then we would be obligated as an agency to do a psychological evaluation on that individual to make sure that they had capacity. So we do decisional capacity appraisals within the department for different things. For medical processes, and research would be no different than that.
Thank you.
Any other questions from members of the subcommittee?
If you'd like, I'd like to address the other concerns they had on the other regulations. So the next concern they had was related to the extended stay in restrictive housing for people with serious mental illness. Sorry. So just to note, if you look at page 11 of the latest amendment of the Special Management and Restrictive Housing Policy, which was 10.2, Section 2, C2, subsection E states an inmate diagnosed with a serious mental illness as defined in CPP 13 shall not be placed in extended restrictive housing unless a multidisciplinary service team for the institution determines there is an immediate and present danger to others and safety in the institution. So one of the concerns, obviously, with corrections is safety, and there has to be a mechanism in place for them to deal with those types of issues. In addition to that particular section, there are multiple layers of reviews, and Dr. Williams can discuss this as well further, but there are multiple layers of reviews that occur whenever a person that's considered to have a serious mental illness is placed in any type of restricted housing or segregated housing.
Yes. So within the Department of Corrections, and again, if you read through CPP 10.2, mental health at any time can, if we feel like there's an adverse reaction to someone who's being held in restrictive housing or special management, we can petition the warden to say, and typically what my staff will do is they'll petition the warden and CC me as the mental health authority for the department to say, John Doe is having, I have concerns with him being in extended housing. He needs to undergo a more thorough evaluation. The mental health staff in restrictive housing are in there. They are required by our ACA accreditation to be in, and by our own policies to be in RHU and SMU once every 7 days. So they are going through those wings and talking with those offenders. After 30 days, if the individual is still held in restrictive housing, then they have to undergo a face-to-face full evaluation to make sure what their mental status is. Are they taking medication? Is this the least restrictive environment? Now, when we move to individuals, offenders who are diagnosed with severe mental illness, within 24 hours of an individual being placed in restrictive or SMU, the psychologist or mental health professional has to meet with that individual and make sure that it is the least restrictive environment. And if there's any concerns with that at all, that is brought forward to myself, and the warden and I then discuss if that individual, and typically what that would mean if they felt like they couldn't be in RHU or SMU, they would be moved over to the Correctional Psychiatric Treatment Unit into our acute unit to make sure that their mental health is stabilized. And so we have multiple levels within 10.2 that you'll see that we make sure that individuals with severe mental illness are in the least restrictive environment. My goal personally as the Director of Mental Health is to make sure that their mental health is the primary thing that we're looking at. That even goes to with regards to if they whatever their offense is for needing to be locked up, if their mental health played a part in that, they are not giving consequences because of their mental health. That is one of the things that we can do with the adjustment committee is say, due to their mental health, this consequence doesn't seem relevant to what was going on, and what they really need is treatment in the psychiatric treatment unit, and then typically what that then means is that we place them in one of our programs for severely mentally ill individuals.
Thank you all for your testimonies. Any other members with questions? Seeing none, thank you for coming. We may have members reach back out to you, but thank you for your time. Please call the next regulation. Oh, wait. Before we do that, we did have staff amendments on that one. There are staff amendments. Is there a motion for approval of the staff amendments? Without objection, so ordered. Thank you all for coming.
Okay. Thank you.
And we are going to move to Cabinet for Health and Family Services, Office of the Secretary, Medicinal Cannabis Program, 915 KAR 1010 and 020, both with staff suggested amendments.
These regulations establish the initial application and renewal procedures for cannabis business licenses and the procedures for the issuance, extension, and revocation of cannabis business licenses. The staff amendments amend various sections to comply with the drafting requirements of KRS 13A and make technical changes.
Would you please identify yourselves for the record?
Hello, Chairman Lewis, Chairman West, members of the committee. My name is Sam Flynn. I'm Executive Director for Kentucky's Office of Medical Cannabis.
Good afternoon. Orrin McFarland, Deputy Executive Director, Office of Medical Cannabis.
And Shelby Lewis, Executive Policy Advisor, Office of Medical Cannabis.
Always good to see you all. There are staff amendments. Is there a motion for approval of the staff amendments? Is there a second? Without objection, so ordered. Are there any questions from members of the subcommittee? My co-chair, Senator West, is going to have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, guys. Done an excellent job standing up the program in short order. Could you talk a little bit about the main, I guess, issue? We just talked about this in the set of regs, is the fee structure. Could you briefly discuss that?
Yes, so there are essentially two kinds of fees for cannabis businesses here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. The first is an application fee. And this is something that, of course, we looked at. This body and the General Assembly directed us to look at best practices from other states. We took that very seriously, and we looked at those best practices and established a non-refundable application fee, which goes in large part to support our program. The second piece of that, or second fee, is the license fee. Now, this is the fee that applicants, once they are selected, will then pay to receive their license. And then those applicants, or those licensees rather, will apply for renewal each year. So a much smaller subset of folks, again, paying a non-refundable renewal fee each year.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no further questions.
Senator Yates.
Hey, team. Thank you for being here. Appreciate your work. I know that we had a lot of applications in there. Do you know what the total amount that was? I mean, I know maybe not offhand, maybe you do, and it may have been on the website, but what was the total amount that was derived from the applications?
The total number of applications was 4,998. Of those, 4,075 were dispensaries. 923 were either cultivators, processors, or safety compliance facilities. 5 of that 923 were safety compliance facilities. All of those have a different fee set for them for non-refundable application fees. The grand total, I believe, was somewhere around $27.7 million in non-refundable application fees.
And is that enough to offset some of the cost of the program, we believe?
Yes, certainly.
One more question from Coach.
I'm sorry, I didn't think I had it, but it's been one of those days, seems like. So that's enough to stand up the program, and we've talked about this. There may come a time in the future where that money dwindles, and then the program will need additional funds. Is that just for public record? Is that
yes,
probably
sir.
true?
That's correct, Senator. So obviously that's a significant amount of funds. I think the program, all told, received $15.1 million in funds made available to us, both general fund and restricted funds over the biennium. That $27.7 million will assist us moving forward over several years in implementing the program and continuing to ensure that this is a safe and secure medical cannabis program. At some point in the future, again, given that the incoming funds to the program will be through those renewal fees from a much smaller group of obviously licensees, and the fees that come in from patients, which the cardholder fee is $25 for their initial application, $25 for renewal, and then, of course, any other fines that may be assessed, which would likely be a much smaller number. There may be need for additional general fund appropriations down the road.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions from members of the subcommittee? Seeing none, thank you all for coming.
Thank you all.
We are going to jump back to the Kentucky Community and Technical College regs. Madam Secretary, we'll jump back there and continue on. I know you all have to apologize. My staff they do a great job, and Lord knows we've given them a challenge today.
Those are 739 KAR 1060 and 070, both with staff suggested amendments.
739 KR 1060 establishes a new administrative regulation that adopts statutory provisions related to the management and administration of Kentucky Community and Technical College System capital construction projects. The staff suggested amendment makes technical corrections to comply with the drafting requirements of KRS Chapter 13A. 739 KR 1070 establishes a new administrative regulation that adopts statutory provisions related to contracting for Kentucky Community and Technical College System capital construction projects. The staff suggested amendment makes revisions for consistency with 739 KR 1060 and makes technical corrections to comply with the drafting requirements of KRS Chapter 13A.
Would you please identify yourselves for the record? Get the mic
Katie
there.
George. I'm a staff attorney for KCTCS.
I'm Andy Caseby. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Facility Support Services for KCTCS.
Thank you all for coming today. There are staff amendments. Is there a motion for approval of staff amendments? Is there a second? I'll second. Without objection, so ordered. Are there any questions from members of the subcommittee? Seeing none, thank you for coming. Please call the next regulation.
Public Protection Cabinet Department of Insurance, 806 KAR 17570 with staff suggested amendment.
806-17570 amends standards for Medicare supplement insurance policies to add 2 definitions, include health status discrimination protections for those eligible for Medicare for reasons other than age, require an annual guaranteed issue period for applicants applying for the same plan through a different insurer, add incorporated material, and make conforming amendments and technical corrections. The staff suggested amendment amends various sections to comply with KRS Chapter 13A and amends Section 13 to clarify that insurers shall comply with health status discrimination protections for non-age eligible persons and criteria for specific initial open enrollment applicants.
Would you please identify yourselves for the record?
Beth Taylor, Staff Attorney for the Public Protection Cabinet and the Department of Insurance.
And I'm Sean Orm, Executive Advisor for the department.
Thank you all for coming. There is a staff amendment. Is there a motion for approval of staff amendment? Is there a second? Without objection, so ordered. Are there any questions from members of the subcommittee? Seeing none, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Please call the next regulation.
Cabinet for Health and Family Services, Department for Public Health, 902 KAR 4501, Ordinary and Emergency, 12, Ordinary and Emergency, 21 ordinary and emergency, and 31 ordinary and emergency. The emergency regulations do not have additional amendments. However, the ordinary regulations have staff suggested amendments.
These regulations establish the definitions applicable to hemp-derived cannabinoid products, the permit requirements for retail sale of hemp-derived cannabinoid products, the product registration and the processing and manufacturing procedures for hemp-derived cannabinoid products, and the hemp-derived cannabinoid product sampling and test requirements. The staff amendments amend various sections to comply with the drafting requirements of KRS 13A, correct citations, and make technical changes.
Would you please identify yourselves for the record? Is that mic on?
Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Julie Brooks. It looks like it's on when it's not. Okay. Julie Brooks, Regulations Coordinator, Department for Public Health.
Daniel Bell, Assistant Director of Public Health Protection and Safety.
Thank you all for coming today. There are staff amendments. Is there a motion for approval of staff amendments? Is there a second? Without objection, so ordered. We do have people signed up to speak on this, so if you all want to back from the table, we do have, I believe, one speaking in for and one speaking in opposition. Is that right, Shannon? In the middle. Well, Jim, I left my book at home, but please introduce yourself. I would have got an autograph, but please continue.
Hello, I'm Jim Higdon, co-founder of Cornbread Hemp, author of Cornbread Mafia, and like several other people today will confess to being a historian in my subject matter. And if you'd like me to speak for and against the regulation, I can do that too. Just like to thank the cabinet and the legislature for working together well on our new industry, helping to sort of pave the way and really set a standard for regulation at the state level. Here in Kentucky, we're really appreciative of both the cabinet and the legislature. There is some small concerns that we have with the regulations on the table here, and sort of generally some concerns I'd like to bring to your attention as well. Specifically to the regulations today, 45012 makes a very small change from adult use cannabinoid products to all cannabinoid products, and that seems to go beyond the statute as passed by the legislature and the authority that it grants the cabinet. The statute passed by the legislature asks the cabinet to regulate Delta-8 THC, which was then interpreted as adult use intoxicating cannabinoid products, not all cannabinoid products. So as we look at these regulations, I just want to make sure that they're within the guidelines, with the frames of, bless you, within the frame of the statute as passed. I'd also like to bring to your attention that the industry is currently being double regulated at the processing level of the supply chain. Currently, hemp processors have a license from the Kentucky Department of Agriculture hemp program to process hemp products. We also are permitted by the Cabinet for Health and Family Services for processing of hemp products. And right now, the regulations from the Department of Ag and the Cabinet are not contradictory in any particular way. But if in the future they would be, it would make it impossible to be in compliance for both at that stage of the supply chain. So that's a solution that would only be able to be solved legislatively. And so I would encourage the legislature to think about taking a look at the holistic hemp and now medical cannabis program here in Kentucky, and looking to resolve some of these outstanding issues relative to how the regulation has evolved over time. Another issue that is affecting our business is the recent inability to ship extract between licensed producers. So in the past, we've been able to ship extract from one processor, one licensee to another licensee, but recently last year, it was disallowed, and we have to physically go and pick up processed extract from another licensed processor, and that's burdensome to the business. And it'd be better if we could just ship that from one licensee to another licensee as we had in the past. The background checks for the hemp program were written 10 years ago and are much more draconian and strict than the background checks for the cannabis program. Something else to look at to smooth over for the future. And I'd also like to point out that Governor Gavin Newsom of California has recently banned all hemp products in his state, and that's affecting our business and our ability to do business in California. Just want to bring that to your attention as well. Thanks.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm sure we'll have some staff members that have comments on that. Shannon, do you want to come up as well? Please introduce yourself for the record and please continue.
Shannon Stiglitz, Senior Vice President of Government Affairs with the Kentucky Retail Federation. That's a mouthful. Thank you very much. I just, like Mr. Higdon, I do want to say that I want to thank the Cabinet. They have been more than accommodating on working with us, helping us reach out to retailers and make sure folks are in compliance. We do still have concerns with 902 KAR 45012, which is specifically related to retail and food service establishments. In addition to the point that Mr. Higdon made about the changing of the words to all instead of adult use cannabinoids, House Bill 544 that directed the regulations specified intoxicating hemp, adult use cannabinoids, Delta 8, however we want to say it. I recognize that they're probably struggling with the fact that there's all these different Delta products, and I'm not an expert, I'm not going to pretend to be, especially sitting next to corn-bred hemp. So they are finding a way to regulate this quickly changing industry, I understand, but we're concerned about the implications of that. Additionally, our biggest concern, though, is the $2,000 per location fee for a retailer. That is a very high cost. A manufacturer, according to 021, the regulation only pays $1,000. And so imagine if you're, and you can look and see how many retailers are registered or which retailers are registered. But for example, if you have 15 locations that are selling the product, that can get quite costly and burdensome to pay for that. We have also some concern about the fact that a retailer may register a product. We see that might conflict with 021, and where it's usually you think of the manufacturer or distributor is registering a product when we think in the terms of alcohol. A retailer registering a product means if you have 15 gas stations that are selling it, let's say, by the same owner, they could register it 15 times. They pay a $200 per registration of that product fee. We're just trying to understand some of those implications and how they connect. I did get the opportunity to quickly speak with Ms. Brooks about potentially deferring 012, not the emergency and the ordinary, and we would be so appreciative and grateful for that. Thank you.
So, Ms. Stiglitz, are you asking for a specific, like a deferral or anything in particular?
That would be great if we could get a deferral on 902. I almost said 90210, like we're in Beverly Hills. 902 KAR 45012, ordinary.
Well, hey, it's been a day to day. I'm gonna, if you all want to back from the table
Sure.
and the department come forward, I'll let you all respond to those claims and we can go from there. Thank you for your testimony.
I did speak with Shannon Stiglitz prior to the regs being called, and we are okay with deferring 902 KAR 45012. Yeah, she said it wrong, and that's in my head.
We changed the number?
Yeah, can we change it now, really? And I did assure her that we would reach out between now and next month to work with her in the industry on the concerns that she expressed. And I've made some notes during Mr. Higdon.
Real quick, just so we can do some housekeeping.
Okay.
There is a request for deferral by the agency. Is there a motion? Without objection, so ordered. Regulations deferred. We got that one covered. Please continue.
Okay. And Mr. Higdon expressed concerns about 012 as well, so we will take a look at that. The background check that he mentioned, we do not require background check, so that is not in a public health.
I believe that's Department of Ag.
Yeah, and that's not in our regulation, so that would not be within our purview to address. The shipping, is that us?
I think that's Department of Ag.
Okay, and I'm not sure that the shipping of extracts between facilities is us. Yeah, we do not prohibit that. So those are not within our purview to address.
On going forward, this will be going to a committee of jurisdiction.
Oh, you cut out. I couldn't hear you.
Sorry. I was going to say, going forward, this will be, once they leave the committee today, they will be going to a committee of jurisdiction if there is something we need to clear up. Jim, I've got property on the Casey-Marion County line out Pleasant Valley Road, so shoot me a message, and if there's something we need to address, we'll certainly go that direction. But if there's are there any other questions from members of the committee? Anything else we need to do? We're good. Thank you all for coming today.
Thank you.
And I appreciate you all working together and cooperating. Thank you. Please call the next regulation.
I believe our last group is Department for Community-Based Services, 922 KAR 1350 and 922 KAR 2160. Sorry, 350 has a staff suggested amendment.
922-1350 is being amended to establish separate standards for non-familial foster or adoptive parent applicants and relative or fictive kin foster or adoptive parent applicants, and remove child-specific language. The staff amendment makes changes to comply with the drafting requirements of KRS 13A. 922-2160 is being amended to address non-compliances from Kentucky's federal monitoring visit and update changes to the Child Care and Developmental Fund.
First of all, thank you all for your patience and indulgence. These meetings usually don't last too long, but we do appreciate you being here. Would you please identify yourselves for the record?
Kristen Breeden, Out-of-Home Care Branch Manager.
Rachel Ratliff, Staff Assistant, Department for Community-Based Services.
Andrea Day, Director for the Division of Child Care.
Thank you all for coming. There is a staff amendment. Is there a motion for approval of the staff amendment? Is there a second? I'll second. I think I heard a second in there. But without objection, so ordered. Are there any members from members of the subcommittee? Not one. Thank you all for coming. If there are no further questions, yay!
The next meeting is currently scheduled for Wednesday, November 13th at 1 p.m. Please let us know if you have conflicts.
And thanks staff for all you all do. We appreciate you today, and we'll see everybody at the next meeting. Meeting is adjourned.